starting to maybe get a sense from Gregory and Dorn, what would be the best use of the time here on what to convey? Like what would be the most valuable piece of information, rather than, you know, unleashing me to talk about the collabathon, the context, like what we've discussed, because that could last for a while. So can you keep me on a tight leash and let me know where it would be best for us to focus on?
Sure. From my perspective, there are at least two, maybe three interrelated subjects that I am excited for you to share about. The first one is your perspective on sort of a nested climate accounting system and the importance of that, and you know, sort of the relationship between our work in OpenTEAM with working landscapes and data and claims and all of these things with this bigger movement of climate accounting. I think that would be really inspiring and useful for us to all understand. And I love the way that you're sort of conceptualizing and leading in that space. So that would be great. And then the second is specifically, I mean, yeah, the Collabathon, but maybe more specifically, your learnings that have emerged around creating a collaborative, open culture to address complex issues, sort of like on the meta level, and specifically, you know, how that's parlaying into the Collabathon and what this year looks like, and, you know, in a grounded way. But I'm particularly interested in your ability to share some of your learnings, you know, 3 years into running the Collabathon, and, you know, because we're also an open source collaborative network. And so swapping sort of, you know, tales of learning and mistakes, I think is really valuable on that level. So those are the two arenas that I'm really excited to hear from you about.
Yeah, and I think I would add to that since certainly members of OpenTEAM have been meeting and having some really in-depth conversations with you, Martin. But I think it'd be really great to also fairly briefly introduce yourself and the lab and the work. So to put the topics that Greg just mentioned in context first. And so we've got till the top of the hour, so it'd be great to dive in. But perhaps start with the high-level introduction, but then we can dive right in.
Sure, sounds good. That was very helpful, and I will probably add just more overview of what I understand we've been discussing so far throughout the year and the opportunity at hand for November. So I'll start with the intro. Hi, everyone. My name is Martin Wainstein. I been working on the climate and energy space for, you know, over a decade now, but also from the lens of from a systems perspective, and for new ways of doing enterprise that are more purpose-driven. And so serious social entrepreneurship has been a hub of my work. I have different hats as it's to be expected. On one side, I run the Open Innovation Lab at Yale University, which I started 2.5 years ago, in many ways to blend in both of my backgrounds from systemic research and development and entrepreneurship. So turning innovative ideas into the ground and to commercially robust projects as well. And within that context, I also took a role leading a project at the MIT Media Lab that we ended up fusing together as a joint initiative on climate finance. And that's probably more my DeFi hat. Most of when we talk about climate accounting connects obviously with financing at some point, but it's really what brings in the robust data and records for capital to fund. The other important hat starting this year is I launched the Open Earth Foundation, which is a public benefit nonprofit based here in California. And the reason why this accelerated this year is because the different projects that we've been incubating in the lab really have gotten a lot of traction. And as soon as we need to really scale them in the real world, my academic hat, I realized how hard it is, because to sign a contract as a university, to hire people as a university, to raise crypto or to do anything related to digital currencies becomes also a nightmare. And so having an independent organization that particularly is designed to focus on digital public goods at the macro level for Earth system governance is really the type of macro thinking that I like to work on. My initial background is in astrobiology, so micro and macro relationships at the planetary scale are really what wakes me up on a Monday morning, ready to work on. And so this is the same logic. In fact, nested accounting is around how systems are inside other systems, and but also how we bring that into the digital infrastructure space. One of the projects, which is Open Climate, or what we now call Open Climate, started by thinking about how distributed ledger technologies can help us manage the accounting of our atmosphere, how much carbon we put in, how much carbon we have left, if we want to keep the threshold below 1.5 degree. That led into a whole pathway of understanding, monitoring physical systems, but also how that relates to policy, particularly the UNFCCC Paris Agreement level policy. And for the last 2 years, we've been doing a lot of research and thinking about the architecture of that. That led into a framework, a meta diagram that I could start by sharing, because I just pulled up a slide to talk about nested accounting, but we'll start with the meta diagram. And this is not just to walk through step by step, but just to explain that when we mapped out this process, it was like, wow, there's a lot of work to be done to digitally integrate all these records between the physical world, the political world, and the relationship between countries, subnational actors, and companies. How does that fit within certifying actions? How do the certified actions become digital assets that can be traded in a network climate market space? And then what does this all mean to mobilizing trillions of dollars of capital to achieve the goals? So there was no way that any digitally integrated solution could come out of my humble lab at Yale. So we really needed to think outside the box. How do we all work together on a digital climate internet? And that led to the idea of a collabathon. Which is also a great opportunity, but also a space to drive dialogues around the role of climate accounting and the role of the different things that we do in agriculture and energy and forestry. How does that pertain to the planet level and to the political level? So hopefully that takes care of the context of the intro and where the Collabathon comes in. And I'll start, I'll follow up with the nested accounting piece, which is quite relevant. So if we think about projects, and here we just have a emission creating project like a fossil fuel plant, a tree, wind turbine, or solar, and also agriculture. These are projects that are owned or operated most likely normally by a private actor. So they fall within non-state actors. And there needs to be a common unit that says, well, this project, produced benefits or deficits, and credits or debits in our climate language. So if it's reduction of greenhouse gases, then it falls under mitigation. If it's improving our resistance towards a warmer world, then it falls within adaptation. But then how those units are accounted, ideally, the company operates within a subnational region. Yale's in New Haven in Connecticut, so we obviously think global, but try to act locally, even though I'm calling in from LA, California. And that subnational actor actually has a pledge, right? Connecticut has a renewable portfolio standard, for example, that they need to meet. And that's also non-state actor is nested within the country level. Now, as soon as we get to the country level, this is where the Paris Agreement kicks in. So all countries have nationally determined contribution, and which means that they've pledged the reduction. In the case of the United States has an economy-wide reduction by specific years, and there needs to be accountability to the sovereign nation leading those. But there now also we can see that there's a network effect. So the more private companies are mitigating climate change sources, that should ideally help the country meet its goals. And so we can only achieve this if we all work together. And so to work them all together, we have to nest them in the same system. And then naturally, the sovereign nation submits their inventory to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change that brings them all together and then performs one of the important accounting processes, which is the stocktake. Is what did countries say they were going to do? What did they do? Where's the record of what they did? And how do they need to increase their efforts? And any form of carrots and sticks we can add to get them to do that. And the name of the game in carrots and sticks here is just name and shame, because there's very little recourse to the Paris Agreement process. So that's I think one of the key aspects of accounting in a way that makes non-state actors, let's say all of us, be part of the Paris Agreement. Now, this is also very relevant if, earth forbid, just to not use God, same as we have a re-election where the current government in the United States persists for another 4 years, in which case the United States will pull out of the Paris Agreement. And if the United States pulls out of the Paris Agreement, which they will already do, actually, I think they're doing that right now, but we won't be able to join again. We are still in coalition of companies and subnational regions that want to be part of the Paris Agreement are actually not from an accounting standpoint. And so it's the level of nested accounting through, let's say, GIS-based jurisdictions that can help address that. And I think that may be a blessing in disguise, because the fate of the planet and the contract that we have in place, the Paris Agreement, should not rely entirely on the political will of sovereign nations. Individuals, civic society, companies have a role. So nested accounting really talks and speaks to that from a digital infrastructure standpoint. With that, I'll just jump back into the Collabathon, and I'll start by saying, like, what are the lessons learned? Well, this is really an experiment, because I think the thesis that we put forward with this is something that resonates a lot with OpenTEAM. If we have to create an ecosystem of solutions where different private companies and different actors, including have to work together on bringing into state-of-the-art technology for agriculture, what are mechanisms that we can bring into governing that collaboration? What are spaces that we can set up and hold that space for that collaboration to happen? What are tools for the actual open source work where the rubber meets the road? What are tools that we can use to drive this forward? And this whole experiment, I think, it's really open to say every time we do something, an instance like this, almost every time there's like, wow, this really worked. Wow, this did not work. Oh my God. Okay, we got to work on that. But it parts from a thesis that I have, and I think we all share, which is collaboration is a technology. And it's a technology that we need to learn. It's a technology we need to master. It's a technology that we are not great at as a civilization, because a lot of our innovation has been driven by competition. And so the model for the Collabathon is, what if we bring in people around the world to collaborate, not in a normal hackathon where teams compete against each other, winner takes all, most of the code gets lost, but every team builds a different piece of the same puzzle. So it requires that we have to map out the puzzle. It requires that we reach out to different nodes. So in our case, we started with universities. Say, bring in your talented students and call your civic tech communities to come together, and let's break down that map into specific prompts, which are the pieces. Put out those prompts for the teams to work on. And then there could be an established working group throughout the year, like OpenTEAM operates throughout the year, to bring a lot of those pieces together and have a more dedicated dev team that's saying, okay, well, this was great. This was developed by this team in Berlin working on this aspect of linking element A with element B, and that can fit with this other piece. That was the logic, right? And so before we launched the Collabathon, we hosted a couple of design sprints, and Gregory and Aaron joined the very first one where we were just trying to put things out there. Last year we did our first run of putting a lot of these prompts on the wiki. So I'll just start walking through some of the digital environments which are relevant for this. The wiki is, as it sounds, it describes the type of events. We have open community events for everyone to create and blast it out, just like a TEDx. And we put a series of prompts last year, and we're updating them this year. In fact, one of the key aspects here is to think about the prompts for, let me just pick one prompt. Forest-based mitigation certificates. I think this was already something that we put out there as an idea last year, just to kick off some thoughts. It didn't lead to a lot of hacking on this side, but it did help put out some inspiration for projects. This one led to a lot of work, consumer disclosure contract for sustainable supply chains. We put prompts out there with a lot of documentation, and then teams work on specific contributions. For example, out of this prompt, all of these teams from Paris, from Yale, from Berlin, from LA, teamed up to work on a common contribution that led to a systems approach for tracking supply chain. And now that led to, this is just to walk through the potential for this, to a working group called the Consumer Disclosure Working Group that have been meeting throughout the year, July, June, May, working on advancing this. So a prompt leads to teams working on a hack, leads to a year-long working group. So we thought this was an interesting model. And so for this year, we're going to go to the November event, which runs from the 9th to the 23rd. We decided to particularly take these dates because this is where the conference of the party normally happens. And we have now the climate experts and a lot of the people that are around the conference of the parties basically just waiting for next year. And so the logic was, this is a good map to understand how nodes and participants team up together. The processes and this timeline will help more. The first 3 days are a series of dialogues. We start with the top level Paris Agreement. Then we go into radical collaboration. How do we scale decentralized open source collaboration? I think, Dorn, you're confirmed to join this panel to talk about the lessons learned from OpenTEAM. So this is many ways, how do we share lessons? Then we go into specifics of emissions accounting, and we have speakers talking about supply chain tracking, consumer disclosure, contracts, differentiated commodities. And then we go into land-based mitigation, certifying and accounting ecosystem service credits. We have Gregory, who will be part of the panel, alongside Diego Saizgil from Pachama. And I invited my friend Kate Dooley, who's an expert on land-based and RED in the context of the UNFCCC. So she brings a wealth of knowledge from the UN world. And then talk about technology and standards and finance. Now, every one of these dialogues segues into an hour of a working group. Because the format of these 3 first days is the high level dialogue, which helps inspire the participants. It helps inspire everyone that's coming through and hear from the thought leaders, but then turn that into working groups showcasing what they're working on around that theme and what are the contribution opportunities. In some ways, as an opportunity for recruiting participants. So if we jump into, let's say, dialogue 3 or dialogue 4, mitigation accounting, we've already, hopefully still confirmed, hosted by OpenTEAM Region Network, this working group will present a prompt to develop a specific ecosystem service credit class that can utilize trusted data acquisition tools and invite participants to form teams or contribute individually to the common working group. So this is where we've been, spending the year mapping out a lot of ideas on this and in this series of decks that led to, at the moment, the state of the art, to this high-level summary of where OpenTEAM and region coalesce in synergy. And this was the first thought that we put together. Region has an ecosystem service credit module. We could put that out to get a credit class going. And I think this is where we discussed. Region can bring in the logic of the credit class. OpenTEAM brings a series of toolkits from in-field data collection. How do we connect these together? And perhaps this is a great prompt. And then obviously this is in the context of a specific agro model, but it's up to you to decide. So we can put in all of this documentation on a prompt that would create on the wiki for participants to see and say, okay, well, this is what OpenTEAM and region are working on. We have a whole panel to talk about it, and we have a whole working group to onboard. And then that doesn't just stop at those first 3 days, because then the weekend, this is where most of the, ideally, developers show up. And we do a series of lightning talks. People come in, and it acts like a bit of a general onboarding to teams and working groups, a marketplace for people that are developers or experts on something. They heard a talk and they say, this is really exciting. I didn't even know that OpenTEAM existed. I want to contribute to their working group. So it helps you kind of pitch what you're working on and getting them to help and contribute in the context of the 2 weeks, but also ideally throughout the year. It also allows that if you guys say, well, we actually were planning to do a webinar, in November or December, we can register it in the community events, and then you'll benefit from getting the traffic of the Collabathon to join. Obviously, the Collabathon is entirely run by volunteers, and this has been also a process of the research. Other than our sweat equity that myself, everyone in the Yale Open Lab, and everyone in all the different co-organizers, Hack4LA, and you guys that have been part of our meetings, that's what makes it happen. But at the same time, we have opportunities to think about how do we bring in models in the future where we can bring in sponsorship or host where we can actually work with Comakery, which is also a key platform in the context of the Collabathon. I'll just share my screen on that because I think that's relevant. So Comakery, it's an incentive mechanism for literally co-developing projects, and the Collabathon is a key aspect of that. So the projects that can be put out there. So let's say we define a prompt for OpenTEAM and Open and region, that can be put out as a project. That project can have details, a link to GitHub, link to the Discord channel, which is I think I have Discord open. Let me bring it up. So for example, in Discord, you're able to navigate nodes. This is a Comakery doing their node. Forest-based mitigation, which is a node. I think we probably had some participation from you guys. And so all the tools, but then also, let's look at the tasks, for example. You can put out tasks, and eventually you can put a bounty for each task. And if the task is developed, submitted, and accepted, it could be paid, right? So this is another area of research that we find particularly exciting on a way to manage incentives, how to get developers around the world that are specifically skilled to contribute to important projects and have their time paid for, but also how do we look at the future of work in the context of a post-COVID world where we need to create jobs and they need to be green, remote-friendly jobs. So there's a lot of discussions that the Collabathon, I think, brokers. I just wrote a piece for a blog for Techstars, who's got now a very strong work on climate tech. And I talked about the 4 important pieces of the Collabathon as dialogues brokers forward. We're halfway there in our time, so it's 11:30 here. So I'd like to stop speaking there. Like I said, keep you on a tight leash and see if we dive deeper into any of these topics. But the thing that I think more exciting is that we start, working together on a common action plan for November, specifically the panel on November 10th in the afternoon, and the working group that we can put forward, because you guys have existing working groups, and these could be showcased in the context of this collaboration space called the Collabathon.
Thanks so much, Martine. And you lived up to covering a lot of material in a very short period of time. So I imagine there will be a number of follow-ups here. Gregory, do you want to start while we let folks pull their thoughts together?
Sure. Yeah, I'll just, give everybody a moment to, maybe jot down or bring your thoughts together. We're very excited about the opportunity to be sort of one of the nested subgroups in the Collabathon. And I think there's several paired, from my perspective, there's several really important either work packages or paired work sessions that the Collabathon kind of offers an opportunity for us to do a little bit of a sprint around and just kind of come together and do a sprint. And I have combined with that, also holding open, how do we present a suite of tools, libraries, open source code that people from around the world might be able to pick up and innovate with of their own. And so those are the two ways that I think we've been conceptualizing approaching this, kind of a both and, that this is an opportunity for us to show up. And even if there's unfinished pieces, hey, let's show up and just work on those and, do lightning presentations to each other and let other people listen in, because I think there's a service to sort of having that be available and having people to be able to see where, we're all going. And then at the same time, being able to devote a little bit of time to be able to sort of pre-bake some stuff for folks to come and just snag and engage with and just hack together on sort of independently. And so the both and of that is, doing that will be sort of the artfulness of pulling off our participation in the Collabathon well. Having done this a couple times with Martine, I think it's almost as if this will always be the balance of showing up and doing the work that we just have in front of us, because that will be never ending, while also getting better and better at presenting the set of tools so that people completely independent and with little to no context can jump in and build something amazing for to integrate land use and regeneration into the global movement to address the climate crisis. So just a little bit of me kind of trying to conceptualize how I want to approach this together with everyone. And then with that, I'll kind of open it up and see what questions folks have, because I'm sure there's a number of them.
Well, I'm gonna keep going on that theme too, Gregory. Well, because I think one of the keys here and what's really exciting to me is really the concept that this collaboration itself and the way we do that is a technology, as Martine mentioned, and that we had Noah on recently with CoMakery presenting again the CoMakery approach to communication and incentives. But a lot of our conversation there was really about this combination of communicating across communities and over time. And so I guess Martine, I'd like to maybe if you might say a few more words about, you touched on this in terms of the, bringing together, creating inspiration, getting the beginnings of working groups that sort of bubble up, but then the process of sort of sustaining those efforts over time. So I wonder if you might, say a few words about, your experience and expectations. And I'm really seeing this as a learning experience for the OpenTEAM community in how other communities are trying to tackle this. and how we can learn from each other again on that process itself. And again, I think I'm going to give you like 5 questions, but the other is the thing that you've mentioned is that where we're heading in agriculture and some of your experience is also being built on doing very similar things within the energy space. And you touched on that just a little bit, but I think there's probably some infrastructure and some important lessons that we can draw in from there. So that should give you like pick and choose wherever you want to go with that.
Thanks, Doran. Well, first, I wanted to echo something that Gregory said, that also the idea of where this becomes also valuable is it's almost like a time of the year that we agree to come together, to sprint together. And the sprints need to happen no matter what. Every project, every working group, every organization is sprinting on products. But if they sprint together on something that's related to climate, at least it makes everyone visible of what's happening. So just organizing your sprint around the context is already helpful, and making it public is very useful. And the first question I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Don, that you put out there is, how do you sustain those efforts over long periods of time? And what are the lessons learned on that? If that's one of the key parts, I think that what I found the secret sauce is something that OpenTEAM has already worked on, which is establishing a consortium where all the stakeholders that bring together, they have an incentive on that common layer. Because at the end of the day, what allows that sustained effort is the multi-stakeholder incentives. I don't think you can drive that through just putting funds in co-makery and paying freelancers. That's just a way of crowd develop a common tool. To really have the organizations drive something forward, it's the large company that needs to implement some digital tools, or they have all their data in their ERP, and they need to surface it for their ESG, or they want to create differentiated commodities. And the startup company that's creating some of those mechanisms, and the sensor company that wants to be able to make sure that their MQTT protocol actually is easily adopted by those. It's that synergy between the different stakeholders that I think makes everyone have the incentive to meet up whenever the working group meets, whether it's a weekly basis or twice a week, and push forward projects that everyone can do individually, but then they come together and they share what they want to share. So a lot of that obviously can be open source, but it doesn't negate like a company having something that they want to keep proprietary, but they're collaborating on the open protocols and standards. And so this is where I think that OpenTEAM brings in a very important piece to this equation of how to make this happen. And from my lens at the Open Earth Foundation, that's our core focus point, is how do we learn how to put together these multi-stakeholder pilots based on consortiums to make sure that whatever gets built solves for all of them. I'll stop there because I want to make sure that I catch your question well, Doran, and see if there's a segue to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you did, and I guess I'm curious again. This requires, because it's not just agriculture, we're interacting with all sorts of other sectors. We have sort of consortia and how those stitch together, and sort of maybe the follow-up question is really how your foundation works in that space, or whether other structures that you're working with will help with that process, because certainly we're not solving only for agriculture here, and we can borrow across sector on some of the underlying tech and platforms and so forth, and particularly actually on this collaboration technology that's by no means unique to agriculture.
Right. Yeah, and I think this is the beauty of these developments, is that there's a lot of cross learning. And then there's a lot of cross-utilization of open source code as well. So obviously on the collaboration space, where everyone finds, oh, this works really well, that can be broadcasted for other people to replicate, and it's a way for creating a bit of collective sense making. From the point of view of, if you guys zero in on agriculture, but the paradigm that you need to look at is in-field data acquisition, out-of-field data acquisition, bringing together into a common framework, analytics, global level analytics that can feed into that, ways in which that can be uptaken by the specific actor, whether it's the farm, whether it's the farmer, whether it's a holding company, and all of that starts escalating as soon as it touches on what are incentives that we can develop for farmers or agriculture companies to change their methodologies and their practice in a way that will drive further carbon sequestration and soil health. That paradigm is similar to what we will see on the forestry sector. How do we incentivize landowners to protect their land or to do reforestation or afforestation? And so all of those incentive mechanisms require an asset that proves the value coming out of the ecosystem, and still has to bring in the data source, in-field data source, out-of-field data source. So the same toolkits can be repurposed for that. And if we look at energy, we're not very far from it. Obviously, a lot of the sensors are different. A lot of the oracles or algorithms or application of AI to attest and to verify the production of energy is different. But then the other common infrastructure could be the same, because you're still producing a value. Let's say you're putting in clean, greener electrons into the supply chain, into the electricity power grid, and you're using sensors to quantify that, pack them into assets that are defined by megawatt hours, but you also can attach a carbon equivalent of how much carbon was displaced from that megawatt hour, and bring that asset into the registry of an actor, right? Whether it's a private developer and Ron's on the line, so he could talk a lot more about how all of these assets then eventually show up in a registry, and someone else could say, hey, you as a farmer, you've improved your soil health, and I want to offset my soil health deterioration with your soil health improvement. A registry can help on that. Of course, I would say, well, make sure you change your practice to improve your soil health whilst you're figuring out how you can use external offsets. But you're still looking at the same infrastructure. So whether it's energy or, and I think that's a very important part. So what I try to focus in is starting from the systems standpoint. And that's why I try to start with these large maps, because then different sectors that are coming in will be able to see where they lie in the map and say, oh, well, I'm using these toolkits. This could be repurposed for that. And that's the other hypothesis that hopefully the Collabathon can help. Not that we all end up using the same toolkits and the same ledger and the same, but at least we collaborate on the same architecture, and eventually we can just define common protocol standards, taxonomies, etc.
I've got another question that kind of shifts gears from the big picture down to more on the ground nitty gritty of the collaboration itself. And I see that Steve from Tech Matters is on. One of the things that we've been talking a lot about is localization of content and multi-language support. And so I guess I'd be interested again, how that's entered into your planning or supporting, and level of facilitation as part of our goal for collaboration and large-scale collaboration is actually leveling the playing field for participation. So maybe, Steve, I see you turned your camera on, so maybe I can let you take it from there.
No, sorry. And then I turned my camera off when I was unmuted. No, I think that's an interesting question.
Can you just condense the question again, Norm?
Or do you want me to do it, or Steve, do you want to put it in your own words?
Oh, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I mean, so part of sort of the collaborative technology here is to democratize access to the process itself. And part of that is localization and translation. And we've been talking a lot about that in agriculture in particular, is that to be effective, we need to be able to have knowledge, insights, and communication from the farm level all the way up. So we have, we've just touched on sort of the really big picture systems mapping, but really to function, it has to work at all levels and co-creation. And that's true. And I guess my question is, as we're building these, collabathons, as we're thinking through what have been some of the thinking that you have in terms of supporting sort of diversity and participation and localization of that process. And I guess I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. And then this leveling playing field or democratization is a very interesting question. And I think that, the thoughts that come to mind are a couple, like, I think you said regionalization or localization. I think this is where our idea of nodes can be interesting, because you can have a very specific region. I was just in a call 2 hours ago with Venice, Italy. They're creating a node, and obviously with their concern, sea level rise, and how do they finance adaptation infrastructure? And so they have a very hyper regional specific issue. And so if you have another area of agricultural practices that's from another region, they can bring in their challenges and share lessons with other parts of the world. So that's one of the thoughts eventually in helping on that. But a lot of the things that also you talk about are common, like I think common taxonomies or common languages that throughout the process everyone shares. In a way of that leveling playing field is, let's agree to a common, language or a common taxonomy. I've spent the last couple of days working on some of our energy projects, and there is a very clear example of that in the energy business process flow called our orange button taxonomy. So that was done by an alliance similar to OpenTEAM that puts in a lot of the right stakeholders together and finances the efforts to define those standards. And that really helps a leveling playing field to say, if you want to create an app that helps in the business process flows for financing energy, and you're going to use a concept of a power purchase agreement, here's the schema, here's the language that you can use. It's already there. It's a standard that's used across the industry. Those are very, very important. And anyone that's engaging on the sector and using technology benefits from that. And that often helps drive that forward. And standards body know a lot of the process going there. In the token space, obviously, we have the Interwork Alliance this year that launched with the ambition of doing that, helping standardization on tokens. How do tokens talk to each other? I often joke that it's great the flush of tokenization, but if everyone comes with their carbon and climate token and their distributed ledgers, and we now have 100 flavors of carbon and climate token, but they don't talk to each other, how are we going to manage the planet? Because
that just came up on our weekly call today, actually.
Yeah, and so it's very important for these things to interoperate in the underlying value, and so you end up getting consortiums of consortiums, like you said, and there are standards that are very broad, like how does a sensor speak to a ledger, and levels of quality that is independent to the sector, to sector-specific taxonomies, right? The agricultural practice and the taxonomy that's used for, let's say, the OpenTEAM network that you've developed in a pilot in the United States, but then that prop gets sold to China, then China that has to audit that understands a lot of that taxonomy because they've been implementing something similar. And so they say, okay, well, I understand exactly where this data fits within it, and I can engage it in a better way. These are the things where I think more and more we'll see more of this happening and needing this. That's not where we normally would say sprint in the next 2 weeks to define a common international standard. A collabathon helps create saying like, the working group that's been thinking about this can meet in the context of the Collabathon for other people that don't know about it to join throughout the rest of the year. And it's just bringing visibility to that, right? Now, again, this is still a bottom-up event. I'm not going to claim that the Collabathon will bring in everyone around the world flushing in towards your working group, because also the communication efforts that we're doing are super grassroots. I hopefully this year we get between 500 and 600 participants moving through the whole event, which is not a lot. But it's enough for us to learn how are we going to scale. If we think about 2 years from now, again in November, in the lead up to the climate negotiation, if we have 10,000 people participating, collaborating, this is the type of vision that we want to look at in the future and say, how are we going to even manage that? Not from a centralized organization, from how does that get decentrally organized or self-organized? Stop there.
I think part of what Dorn was referring to with language was a much more sort of humdrum use of the term, which is to some extent today with OpenTEAM, if you don't speak English, you can't really participate, right? You can't attend the meetings and understand what's going on. There's no simultaneous translation. And to the extent that we're creating tools for those tools to be adopted around the world by farmers on the ground who don't speak English, then there's a need for translation, localization, internationalization. Your example of Venice was interesting because a hyper-local issue could be discussed in Italian among Venetians, right? There's no need for them to have their interaction be in English. But maybe Doran's question was, how much have you considered trying to leverage technology for simultaneous translation, for automatic translation of both spoken language and written language interchanges in trying to broaden and further democratize and include the world in your work?
Yeah, that's a great question. And some of these challenges come up when they come up, right? And so you cross the bridge when you get there. If you have someone in Latin America that wants to apply exactly what you're doing, but they don't speak English, and so there's two options there. I'll just take that example. If your digital language, let's hear your protocols and taxonomies that I was discussing before, are written in English, and it just says, soil health is a field name, then it's important to translate it. But when they have to code, because they're going to address that, they could just use it in English. Or code, soil health means code 6843, and they just put 6843, and that's independent of the language. But then they have to have a dictionary of soil health or salud de la tierra. I don't know exactly what's the technical term in Spanish. Being Argentinian, but these things are not exactly translatable. It's the same code, right? 6843. This happens with countries. So like I work closely with the World Bank on different digital infrastructure projects. They have this constant issue, right? And so when they go in to develop something digitally and they have to talk about which country it is, you cannot write a country. You have to write the code because no matter where you're in the world, that's the code. And these things just pop up. They're normal. So as we're building the digital infrastructure, that consideration, now you write your documentation in English around how to use your toolkit, that, yes, can be translated. And then you pick up a pilot and say, well, let's use a pilot to test whether our translation, our Google Translate, is making any sense to someone in Peru or Ecuador. And then go back into review the digital taxonomy as well. So that's the thought that I have, right?
Well, I mean, I think that, Martin, you answered sort of part of the question. I think you hit on both, because I think where we're headed is really the connection between the two, is that we have to have the localized conversations, and yet we can also work towards the common software language, the common scientific language, and the translations there. But in order to develop consensus and trust and and bring more people into the design process, we do have to also have exactly what Steve mentioned, is those conversations. And so I'm particularly interested in today's conversation around the collaborative technology piece that we're looking at, and how do we support this platform. It's not even a platform, but it's the infrastructure for consortia, the infrastructure of large scale collaboration that requires, discourse boards. And as we talked about with Noah, we've got Slack and Matrix and everything else under the, where the conversations required for consensus take place. And so I think that's something that I'm particularly interested and excited for us to explore as we participate. And I just, and I appreciate your framing that for us.
Yeah, I mean, with the time that we have left, I'd love to see if to gauge if you feel comfortable about putting out there a working group that fuses the efforts from OpenTEAM and region, or the synergy there, and how would we frame it into a prompt where we can whip up a wiki page for you guys that you can dump in that content there. And people that are in the Collabathon can see, like, oh, this is an established working group. And if you're going to, present at some point, people can see when that happens, and whether that would be a good next step. That we try to think about what's the most valuable thing. I mean, we discussed the idea of the ecosystem service credit. I think that's going to be one of the topics of the dialogue. How do we understand? How do we use ecosystem service credits as an umbrella term, but also a concept to land-based mitigation value, more than land-based mitigation value. But for the context of climate, that could be a specific sub part of it. And how do we cross that with specific agricultural practices, let's say soil health improvement, to drive drawdown, right? And how do we pack that into something out there to say, here's where these groups that are very well advanced in discussing this OpenTEAM region, this is where they're at with their working group, and here are the contribution opportunities. And if you're an expert on soil health, if you're an expert on data acquisition, if you're an expert on blockchain technology, this is where you can contribute to these efforts. So I'd love to be able to help in the next couple of weeks put something like that together that then you can represent in the session.
Well, thanks for framing that challenge for us. I think we can put it on our agenda, and I think our objective for today's session was really to, again, provide some of the background and introduce this concept and put a name to a face.
A face to a name.
A face to a name, rather. Yeah, exactly. I think we can bring this back to help work on the prompts and help get you what you need as we get closer to the next sort of final planning phase here.
Yes. Great. Well, we're on the top of the hour. If there's more thoughts or questions, one idea, Gregory, that I'm thinking is let's whip up a Discord channel, and for the next couple of weeks we can start using it to collaborate on that. I can certainly help. Maybe this weekend put together a wiki space. Let me know how I can help on this end.
Yeah, let's chat a little bit more, Martine, and maybe I'll be in touch with folks in the OpenTEAM community. If you'd like to join a coordination call, stand up. Maybe we'll start doing that weekly moving forward to the Collabathon. And I'll definitely link with a Discord.
Great. Yeah. I mean,
okay.
pass that along to you because you're more familiar with the tools that we have on the Collabathon. We've lost Gregory.
Great. Thank you all. Thanks for joining. Thank you, Martin.
Great connect.
Yep.
All right, bye-bye.